Order, please. I'd like to call the Law Amendments Committee to order for today's proceedings. We'll be dealing with 9 bills. Welcome, everyone, to the legislature. And I'd like to first begin by going around the table with introductions, and perhaps we can begin with Ms. Gender.
Good morning, welcome. I'm Claudia Chender, MLA for Dartmouth South.
Good morning, I'm Susan LeBlanc, MLA for Dartmouth North.
Morning, John Lohr, MLA for Kings North.
Elizabeth Smith-McCrossan, Cumberland North. Good
morning, and Bill Horn, a member of the legislature for Waverley Fall River Beaverbank.
Good morning, Rafa Di Costanzo, MLA for Clayton Park West.
Good morning, I'm Margaret Miller, the MLA for Hants East.
Good morning, bonjour, Lena Metledge-Diab, membre qui représente Halifax Armdale.
Thank you all. My name is Keith Irving. I'm the MLA for Kings South and the Vice Chair of the committee, and will be chairing today's proceedings. I'm also joined here on my right with Mr. Gordon Hebb, and on my left, Karen Kinsley, both from Ledge Council, to assist the committee on the proceedings today. I'll begin first with a few housekeeping items. This committee operates under the rules of the House of Assembly, so please remember to mute your cell phones. I'll begin with mine. We're okay. As well, only accredited media are permitted to take photographs during the course of the proceedings, and the rules of the House with respect to the gallery is that no demonstration of approval or disapproval of the comments made during the proceedings are permitted. Washrooms are downstairs, base of the stairs. Take a U-turn to the left. Those are the public washrooms, and in case of an emergency, please exit that's Granville Street, and meet at Parade Square. So I think that covers that off. So this, of course, is the opportunity for the public to provide input to the members of the legislature with respect to legislation before the House. And we will be dealing with 9 bills, and we have presenters on 3 of those that we will deal with promptly here. Each presenter can have up to 10 minutes to make their presentation, followed by 5 minutes of questions from members of the committee. I'll do my best to give you a 2-minute warning. If you're approaching the 10 minutes, you're certainly permitted to go beyond 10 minutes if you want to, but you'll be giving up the potential time for questions. So I think that's it, and so I'd like to begin first of all with Bill number 232, the Electricity Act, and Mr. Goldberg is here from the Canadian Solar Industries Association, and you can come forward and introduce yourself and make your presentation. One other thing I forgot to mention is that we do have a staff person who may be in and out of this room. If you notice the sign on the door, this is a peanut-free zone with respect to a severe allergy. So we thank you for your cooperation on that front. Mr. Goldberg, do you have peanuts?
No, I do not.
Okay. Thought there was a problem there. Mr. Goldberg.
Thank you very much. My name's Lyle Goldberg, and I'm Policy and Regulatory Affairs Manager for the Canadian Solar Industries Association. And I'm actually based in Halifax. So my job is I work with Nova Scotia solar industry, all orders of government, utilities, other stakeholders, NGOs to advance solar across the province. Our association is actually merging with the Canadian Wind Energy Association effective July 1st, 2020, and we'll be responsible for an expanded renewables mandate to include solar, wind, and storage technologies. So we're very excited about the future. I want to thank the committee for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today on Bill 232, which proposes amendments to Chapter 25 of the Electricity Act. We want to commend the province for introducing these progressive changes, which will create the Green Choice program, enabling the province to move forward with its agreement with the federal government to procure 100% renewable electricity for all federally owned facilities by 2022. What's interesting is that this only makes up like 8% of all of the electricity, federal electricity in Canada, but it comprises 36% of the GHG emissions because we're coal dependent. So this is a big project that's really going to help green the province. This initiative has the potential to attract $200 million in private sector capital investment, creating up to 1,000 construction jobs while eliminating 126,000 tons of greenhouse gas emissions annually in the province. We note that the federal government's desire to procure renewable electricity is representative of a broader trend that is leading many commercial and industrial consumers of electricity to seek out renewable energy to power their own operations for both economic and sustainability reasons. Indeed, such bilateral procurement of renewable energy is a major driver of renewable energy growth in the United States and Europe. For example, Bloomberg New Energy Finance reported that commercial and industrial customers signed new contracts for almost 9,000 megawatts of renewable energy in 2018 in the United States. These customers include AT&T, Walmart, Facebook, Royal Caribbean Cruises, Iron Mountain, Nike, Salesforce, Smuckers, and a number of others. Given the cost competitiveness of electricity provided by wind and solar energy today, we believe the new Green Choice program will be of interest to customers other than the federal government, including the commercial, industrial, and institutional sectors, as well as municipalities and First Nation communities. CanSIA and CanWIA look forward to the opportunity of working with the province in developing the regulations in advance of the program rollout to explore how it can benefit the growing customer and consumer interest in renewable energy. We view these legislative changes as a good first step in shifting Nova Scotia's power grid to 100% renewable electricity over time. But in order to achieve this goal, the province will need further strategies to increase our renewable energy deployment, particularly with respect to solar and wind. One specific area we recommend the province consider is developing regulations that support virtual net metering. Virtual net metering, also known as community solar, refers to when all or a portion of the output of a centrally located solar or wind system is virtually shared among a group of subscribers located off-site. These customers receive credits on their electricity bill for excess energy produced by their share of the renewable energy system. The advantages of virtual net metering is that it offers customers of all types and sizes a way to lower their electricity bill without the upfront costs or having to install a solar system on their home, building, or property. For example, it would enable a family that rents an apartment or a small business owner without a suitable roof for solar to own or subscribe into a virtual net metering project located somewhere else on the grid and benefit from a lower electricity bill. And I think this is particularly important in Atlantic Canada, where we have the highest rates of energy poverty, up to 21% of the population within Atlantic Canada. So this could be a solution to help address that issue. The virtual net metering model is tried and tested, having been successfully implemented in many jurisdictions throughout North America and Europe. The United States Solar Energy Industries Association reports that there are community solar projects currently active in 40 states, and that as of 2018, over 1,500 megawatts of solar capacity has been enabled nationwide through community solar programs. A number of municipalities in Nova Scotia, including the town of Kentville, the county of Antigonish, and the town of Bridgewater, have expressed interest in developing these types of projects within their respective jurisdictions. Under the current regulatory framework, only Nova Scotia Power and those municipalities that own their own electric utility have the ability to develop such projects. The Alternative Resource Energy Authority, representing 3 municipal utilities in the province, has recently issued an RFP to construct 3 community solar gardens in the towns of Antigonish, Berwick, and Mahone Bay. And we're very excited about this project. And we actually helped them with the RFP. We sent it out to all of our members. So we're very excited to see the results of that project. Transitioning Nova Scotia's electrical grid from fossil fuels to renewables also represents a huge opportunity to create a significant number of green jobs across the province. Consider the following. The fastest growing job in the United States right now is solar installer, followed by wind turbine technician. A study by Clean Energy Canada concluded nearly 300,000 Canadians were directly employed in clean energy in 2017. That represents nearly 100,000 more than those employed in mining, quarrying, and oil and gas extraction, and 7.5 times as many people working in the forestry sector. CanSIA's Nova Scotia Residential Solar Market Outlook and Labour Force study released in April of 2019 projected that a favourable policy environment could enable up to 178 megawatts of installed solar by 2030 in Nova Scotia, corresponding to approximately 22,000 residential solar installations and over 1,100 jobs. And that's just on the residential side, not the commercial or industrial. The uptake of residential solar has grown substantially in Nova Scotia since the launch of Efficiency Nova Scotia's Solar Homes Incentive Program. As of January 2020, just over 2,000 applications have been received, supporting the installation of approximately 8 megawatts of solar capacity across the province. This has contributed to annual electricity cost savings for homeowners of $1.5 million. Half of the solar homes applications received are from outside of HRM, indicating strong solar interest in both urban and rural communities. There are currently more than 60 solar installer companies registered on Efficiency Nova Scotia's solar trade network. Prior to the Solar Homes program, there were fewer than 20 in the province. And recently, Nova Scotia was rated #1 in Canada by energyhub.org as the #1 place to do residential solar. So we're very excited, and the province has done a great job promoting that.
2 minutes.
Okay. As you're aware, the province passed the Sustainable Development Goals Act in October 2019, which aims to reduce Nova Scotia's GHG emissions by 53% below 2005 levels by 2030, while moving Nova Scotia to net zero carbon footprint by 2050. The legislation also states to expand Nova Scotia's green economy and create jobs. At the same time, Nova Scotia Power is currently undertaking its Integrated Resource Plan consultation process, which will determine Nova Scotia's electricity mix over the next 25 years. CanSIA and CanWIA are both active participants in this process. Given the aggressive targets of the new Act and the IRP consultation now taking place, CanSIA and CanWIA support Bill 232 as an important tool to meet growing commercial and industrial demand for renewable energy and to advance solar and wind deployment in Nova Scotia. At the same time, it is imperative that the province consider further changes to the Electricity Act through introducing virtual net metering that would open up solar access for all different types of Nova Scotia Power customers, while at the same time helping the province achieve net zero carbon by 2050. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Goldberg. We have certainly one question. Ms. LeBlanc.
Thanks, Mr. Goldberg, for your presentation. It's always exciting to hear about the work that you're doing. In the piece of legislation that we have in front of us, there's, basically it was sort of written so that the federal government, excuse me, can procure green energy. Do you think it's important for the provincial government to have to be mandated to procure green energy through this program as well for its buildings and fleets?
Mr. Goldberg.
We actually did a Nova Scotia solar roadmap that's on our website, and that was submitted to the Department of Energy. One of our recommendations is that the province mirror the federal initiative by also going to 100% renewable for their own operations and facilities. So the answer to that is yes.
Ms. Smith-McCrossan.
Thank you. Although today is a beautiful sunny day, the sun is not always shining and the wind's not always blowing here in Nova Scotia. So what work is your organization doing with regards to storage of energy? And are you working with any Nova Scotia companies on the future of storage?
Mr. Goldberg.
Storage The advancement of solar and wind to get to 100% renewable can't happen without storage. So it is the next phase. And we've taken on an expanded mandate to include storage. We're not working, well, I shouldn't say, Rolls Battery out of Spring Hill, of course, is a strong member of CanSIA and has been for many, many years, and we do a lot of work with them. And we're also looking, certainly the research that's being done at Dalhousie with lithium-ion batteries is quite amazing as well. So yes, we will be working locally where we can. But solar and wind complement each other. So solar obviously produces well during the day. Wind tends to produce more in the winter and in the evenings. So it is a nice complement to each other. And once you include storage in that mix, I think you'll see much more rapid deployment of both technologies.
Ms. Chander, we've got about 3 minutes remaining.
Thank you. It was great to hear you at committee in this past year, and also nice to see you here. I think the virtual net metering suggestion is a great one, certainly one that we'll take under advisement. And I guess my question is, you note that under the current framework, only Nova Scotia Power and municipalities with their own utility can create these programs. What are some, in other jurisdictions that are using it, what are some other organizations that have the ability legislatively to do this? Like, how would you like to see that expanded?
Mr. Goldberg.
There's not a lot of virtual net metering taking place in Canada. There's a little bit, I think, in Alberta, which is more of a privatized, it's not a monopoly. The U.S. has taken off with this stuff. We actually brought in a presenter at our solar summit from Minnesota, and they're kind of the U.S. leaders in virtual net metering and community solar. So there's a lot of different models out there. Massachusetts is doing a lot. Like I said, I think there's 40 U.S. states. And I don't think that came easy. There were battles with their local utilities as well to make this thing a reality. So, you know, it's not something that's going to happen overnight. But I view the Department of Energy here as very progressive and wants to advance renewables. So I'm confident that we can work together to look at virtual net metering.
Let's sneak in one last question from Mr. Lohr.
Yeah, similar question, virtual net metering. I just wanted a little bit more of an explanation of exactly how it works, and do you see it like people investing in would this be within the province, someone investing in a solar program within, or is it outside of the jurisdiction, like would it be out in other provinces? Just a bit more of an explanation of virtual net metering, that's what.
Mr. Goldberg.
I think typically you would construct a utility scale solar farm or solar garden, and different types of customers would, one example is they would be subscribers to the project. So it might be that they lease, you know, X number of panels to help offset their electricity bill, because they may live in an apartment, they may live in a house that doesn't have a suitable roof for solar, could be small businesses. There's a lot of work in the States where farmers are utilizing virtual net metering. They're supplying the land, constructing these large projects, and they're actually getting a break on their bill and getting leased for the land as well. So there's a number of different models that could happen, but it will certainly be of a local benefit.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Goldberg. Appreciate
You're welcome.
you coming in today.
Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you. Ms. Miller?
Virtual, yes, okay. I'm certainly interested in the virtual net metering. It sounds really interesting, but I think that the department's actually talking about that now. So we'll leave that discussion to the Committee of the Whole House. So right now I'd like to move that we refer that this be referred back to the Committee of the Whole House without amendment.
Any comments? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you very much. Bill number 225, the Elections Act, and we have the Chief Electoral Officer of Nova Scotia with us here today, Mr. Temporelli. Welcome, Mr. Temporelli, and I forgot to mention to folks that are presenting that the chair will be acknowledging you, so your microphone can be turned on. So it's a little bit of a rhythm that we get into to help Ledge TV. So with that, I'll turn the mic over to Mr. Temporelli.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today about Bill 225, an act to amend the Elections Act. Following the May 30th, 2017 general election, I submitted reports to the House of Assembly, which included recommendations for legislative changes, which would modernize the Election Act and improve the administration of provincial elections in Nova Scotia. When considering these recommendations, I sought the advice of the Election Commission, which provided unanimous support for the majority of the more than 40 amendments you see in the bill before you today. When planning for and delivering a provincial election, our highest priorities are the integrity of the electoral process, the convenience of access to the many voting opportunities Nova Scotia offers to our electors throughout the election, and the clarity and trust the Act provides to candidates that they can carry out their campaigns in a fair environment. It is my belief that the amendments put forward in this bill are in keeping with Elections Nova Scotia's priorities because they will improve transparency and clarify processes for electors and candidates and loosen current operational restrictions by simplifying electoral administration. Ultimately, these changes will improve voting access and help us streamline the administration of elections and allow for the further modernization of elections in this province when the time and conditions are right. Nova Scotia is a leader in election innovation in Canada. Here are some of the examples what we are proud to offer our voters. We are the first province to offer modern voting features like instituting maximum times for voters to travel to get to their advance and election day polls, providing every eligible elector in the province a personalized voter information card showing their 4 closest early voting opportunities by both distance and time traveled, as well as their election day poll. We offer cloud-based, real-time voting anywhere in this province, where voters can cast their vote anywhere in the province on ballots with the names and party affiliations of all their local candidates printed for them while they're standing there waiting to vote. The amendments before you for consideration today contain the next logical steps in electoral reform for us here in Nova Scotia and for others in Canada to observe, to embrace, and to follow in future. Elections Nova Scotia and I were pleased to work with the Department of Justice in the drafting of the Minister's proposed amendments tabled in Bill 225. Once this bill receives royal assent, Elections Nova Scotia will be charged with the responsibility of seamlessly weaving these changes into our delivery plans for the upcoming provincial general elections. I want to thank you again for the opportunity to speak today in support of Bill 225.
Thank you very much, Mr. Temporelli. Ms. Chender with the first question.
I'm going to try to cheat and ask 2 questions in my one question, and you can choose which to answer.
Duly noted, Ms. Chander.
I guess the first is we were obviously pleased to see a signal that childcare expenses and expenses related to accommodation for disability would be included. And I'm wondering, we are hopeful that those will mirror what the federal ones, so it might be a separate rebate, and that hopefully there will be a generous interpretation of those expenses. So any information you have about how that will be decided or when we'll know would be really welcome. And my other question is around fixed election dates. So this is something we hear a lot. We're talking about it a lot. You spoke of modernizing the Act. Do you feel like including a fixed election date, notwithstanding the fact that that may not be followed, would also modernize the Act?
Mr. Temporelli.
With respect to the first part of your question, we are currently drafting guidelines for that amendment, which we hope to have out in a month or 2. That will be for general public information and feedback, and we hope to have a finalized version of that by September. With respect to your second part of the question, I asked for consideration of a fixed date after the 2013 election. From our perspective, it would be a nice to have, particularly when you have a majority government. If there isn't a majority government, it doesn't really matter. Would it save us money? Not necessarily. The additional costs that we incur are, if we're ready and the government doesn't call election, then we have to retrain. But it would certainly help us with administration. Is it something that would further modernize the Act? I would say yes.
Thank you. Mr. Lohr.
I guess I too wanted to ask about fixed election dates, and I recall reading in your report, I believe, that you put out after the May 2017 election on things that needed to be changed, was that fixed election dates was a key point in that, upon which many of the other recommendations kind of hinged. In other words, the benefits of many of the other recommendations in your report were kind of dependent on fixed election dates also. So I kind of had the feeling reading that report that this was quite important. I just wonder if you would comment on that.
Mr. Temporelli.
I believe that was after the 2013 general election. Yes, we were hoping for that, and there's a trickle-down effect of that on other changes. But you make do with what you get, right? And we've done pretty well since then. Again, seamlessly moving forward and preparing early.
Thank you. Any further questions? Ms. Smith-McCrossan.
It was my understanding that there were 3 recommendations you made that were not part of this legislation, this amended legislation. Can you speak to those changes that weren't accepted?
Mr. Temporelli.
Sure. One of them was that if you ask for a judicial recount and it was more than 25 votes, and it stays for more than 25 votes, that you be responsible for some of the costs involved in that. That did not receive unanimous support of the Election Commission and isn't in here. On further reflection, if the candidate who has asked for a judicial recount and hasn't reached their spending limit, that would become part of their election expenses anyways that would be reimbursable. So I'm not too pulsed about that one. What other ones didn't receive? What other ones didn't receive? I wasn't prepared for this one. Right. The second one was the refund of the candidate's deposit of $200. There have been 2 cases in Canada at the provincial level, the highest court provincially, that said that's unconstitutional. It impedes people from running, right? Although it's only $200, and that one didn't go forward. The third one was, sorry? Right, another important one. Voting for the close of nominations. In 2013, 3,400 people voted before the close of nominations. In Newfoundland, there was a case because they vote before the writ is even issued. And the courts there determined that you really shouldn't vote before the close of nominations because voters do not know who they're voting for. They don't have a full spectrum of information. There was a similar case in Alberta that decided the same thing. It makes sense to provide people with the opportunity to vote early. Of the 3,400 that voted, most of them voted within their electoral district at the returning office, and they voted in the last 2 or 3 days before nominations closed. So our feeling was that this could be accommodated by most of them, and those that couldn't, who would be out of the district at the time, we were prepared to take write-in ballot applications from them and approve them before the close of nominations, and send them courier them a ballot kit once nominations closed, along with the names of all the candidates in their districts.
Thank you. We do no further questions at this time. Oh, one quick one. Yeah, sure. Ms. Smith-McCrossan.
All right, thank you. Just to follow up to the first recommended amendment that wasn't put in legislation, what would the cost of a judicial, like what is the cost, what would the cost be to a candidate if they did have to pay?
Mr. Temporelli.
All I was asking for here was that the judge, the justice that's in charge, take it into consideration. They may say, pay $1, pay the costs of the other parties that are involved, but it would just be that they take it into consideration.
Great. Well, thank you. Oh, Ms. Miller.
I'm just going to make a motion.
Oh, okay. Well, let me.
Okay.
Oh, we have.
Thought you were done.
We have 3 minutes remaining. Ms. Chender.
I'd like to make an amendment. I'd like to propose an amendment.
Okay.
If you could pass around the
well,
change
just
sheets.
before we go into that, let me thank Mr.
Yes. Well, I was going to wait.
Mr. Temporelli for coming in today, and thank you for your recommendations and all the work that you do for our democratic system. Thank you. So, Ms. Chender, you have a change.
Oh. I'd like to propose an amendment. And I'll read the text of the amendment, and then I'll speak to it briefly. Is that
Please go ahead. Yes, thank you.
So I'll draw your attention to LAC NDP 1, the change sheet in front of you. Page 2, add the following clause immediately after clause 3, 4, chapter 5 is further amended by adding immediately after section 29 the following section. 29A sub 1, nothing in this section affects the powers of the Lieutenant Governor, nor including the power to dissolve the House of Assembly at the Lieutenant Governor's discretion. Sub 2, subject to subsections 3 and 4 and the powers of the Lieutenant Governor referred to in subsection 1, notwithstanding any other enactment, a general election must be held on the second Tuesday of June in the 4th calendar year following ordinary polling day for the most recent general election. Sub 3, where the Chief Electoral Officer is of the opinion that a Tuesday that would otherwise be ordinary polling day is not suitable for that purpose, including by reason of it being in conflict with a day of cultural or religious significance or a federal or municipal election, the Chief Electoral Officer shall choose another day in accordance with subsection 4 and recommend the Governor and Council that ordinary polling day be that other day, and the Governor and Council may make an order to that effect. Sub 4, for the purpose of subsection 3, the chief electoral officer may choose as an alternative ordinary polling day one of the 7 days following the Tuesday that would be an ordinary polling day. And sub 5, in the case of a general election under subsection 2, an order must not be made under subsection 3 after April 1st in the year in which the general election is to be held. Pages 2 to 20, clauses 4 to 67, renumbered as 5 to 68. And all that means is that we have fixed election dates. In this proposed amendment, we have suggested that those fixed election dates would be in June, and so as not to conflict with federal and municipal elections, which both take place in the fall. Based on our canvas of this great federation of ours, we are the only remaining province without fixed election dates. The Minister of Justice recently made remarks on second reading of this bill that fixed election dates don't work. We respectfully disagree with that contention. We acknowledge that fixed election dates may not always be abided by in our system, and I think the Chief Electoral Officer noted in the case particularly of a minority government, it's unlikely that we would go to the polls every 4 years, but as long as we have this first past the post system, and we tend to have a plurality of majority governments, in fact, not only would it aid in the work of I think, the good folks at Elections Nova Scotia, but I also think it would remove some of the political speculation and advantage that exists in the system as we have it now, and allow folks to focus more on the legislative work at hand. And so for that reason, we are moving this amendment.
Thank you, Ms. Chender. Any comments on the, Mr. Lohr?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The PC party does support fixed election dates. However, and I can say on a personal note that I would support a fixed election date in June. Having been a farmer all my life, I know how long the days are. We have sunlight until 10 o'clock at night. I appreciate that about the month of June. But I would want to have the opportunity to discuss it with my colleagues if we, as a party, were committing to a particular date. I think that would be a discussion that we'd want to have as a group. As I said, I could commit to June right now, but my party maybe not. So we would abstain from voting, but we are supportive of fixed election dates.
Thank you, Mr. Lohr, for enlightening us. Ms. Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and for Mr. Lohr's benefit, it might be daylight, but farmers go till midnight, but polling stations don't usually. So anyway, certainly this is certainly an important amendment, and I don't think it's up to this. It could be up to, certainly up to this this group to be able to accept or deny that amendment, but I think that this is something that we would welcome on the floor of the House during the committee of the whole House.
Thank you. Any further comments? All in favor of the amendment, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Nay. 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 Motion is defeated. Now, could I have a motion with respect to referring Bill 225 to the Ms. Miller?
So I would refer Bill 225, the Elections Act, be referred back to the committee of the whole without amendment.
All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you. Next up is Bill number 227, the Legal Aid Act, and we have Megan Longley, the Executive Director of Nova Scotia Legal Aid. Welcome, Ms. Longley. As you've seen, 10 minutes for presentations and 5 minutes for questions. The floor is yours, Ms. Longley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the committee for giving me the opportunity to make what I hope will be very brief comments. I am the Executive Director of Nova Scotia Legal Aid, and I'm making comments today on behalf of the Commission who govern Nova Scotia Legal Aid. The Commission just wants to first and foremost extend its thanks to the government as well as to the other parties for supporting these amendments. The Commission feels these are really valuable and important amendments, and they will really allow Nova Scotia Legal Aid to, or the amendments will allow the Act to reflect the work that Nova Scotia Legal Aid is really already doing on the ground. The Act as it now is the initial piece of legislation that's over 40 years old that created the Nova Scotia Legal Aid Commission. So I think both the Commission and even just the language in the Act have all come a long way. Also wanted to thank both the government and the other parties in the legislature for their comments in support of legal aid and recognizing how important it is to have a robust legal aid system to support Nova Scotians. While the Commission wholly supports the Act to amend the Legal Aid Act, there is just one very small issue that the Commission has asked me to bring to your attention, and it would really just involve a small tweak if so found to be appropriate. Just given the timing of this Act coming before the House, there is clause, it's Section 2, subsection 5 of the Act to amend, which would institute term limits for Commission directors appointed to the Commission, meaning that nobody could serve more than 3 consecutive terms on the Legal Aid Commission. And while that is a clause that we at Legal Aid would support, the impact of the timing of this is such that the 4 Commission directors who currently make up the executive of the Commission, and that includes the chair of the Commission, would all be ineligible from seeking reappointment at the end of their term, and their terms all end towards the beginning of 2021, so about a year from now. Our chair, Mr. George Ashe, has only been in the role of chair for about a year now, so that would mean he would only have 1 more year in that position before he would be ineligible to reapply. That role, I think, as you can imagine, takes a considerable amount of effort and commitment to learning, and that would be a very short term to serve as chair after all that work, learning the role. And the other impact of that would mean that we would have a smaller commission, which is another one of the amendments that are part of this Act, but that would be a smaller commission made up of new or relatively new commissioners. Nova Scotia Legal Aid Commission employs around 200 people. Our budget is in the range of $27 million. So I think you can understand that some continuity as well as a longer period of time to transition the expertise and knowledge of our current more senior directors would be very important for an organization of this size. There would be 2 different ways that this could be accomplished. One would be by just adding a further clause to the final section of the Act to amend, which is Section 26. That section currently allows current commissioners to complete their term despite the smaller commission size going forward. A further clause to allow current commissioners to reapply, notwithstanding Section 2, subsection 5 would allow the current commissioners to reapply. An alternate way of accomplishing the same thing would just to be to change the legislation so that Section 2, subsection 5 of the Act to amend comes into force on a later date to be determined by Cabinet, so that that section wouldn't take effect immediately and would allow the Commission time to work out a transition. And that really is all I would say, other than to again thank the government for working with the Commission on these changes, which I think are very important.
Great, thank you, Ms. Longley. Any questions for Ms. Longley? Thank you very much. Looking for a motion with Ms. Diab.
So, Ms. Longley, I just want to say before I make the motion, thank you so much for coming and Clearly, I think we all recognize the importance of legal aid in the province. We understand that the department, though, is currently reviewing exactly what you're just proposing, and we're looking forward to the minister and the department bringing forth an amendment at the committee of the whole, rather than us trying to work it out here. And with those words, if it's okay, unless somebody else has any questions, I would like to move that we refer it back to the committee of the whole at the moment here without any amendments.
Thank you, Ms. Diab. Ms. Gender?
Refer it back to the House, yeah.
Ms. Gender?
I'm glad to hear that the department is aware of this issue and is working on it. I think the suggestion makes eminent sense for all of the reasons that the presenter noted, and so we'll be looking for that amendment and preparing maybe a backup one of our own in case that doesn't make it through, and so hopefully this will get resolved at the Committee of the Whole House.
Great, thank you. Any other comments? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you very much. Bill number 220, Labour Standards Code. Can I have a motion, Ms. Di Costanzo?
We have no presenters, and I'd like to put a motion forward to refer Bill number 220, Labour Standards Code, back to the House without amendment.
Any discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you. Bill 221, Labour Standards Code Amendment. Ms. Di Costanzo.
Again, I would like to put a motion to refer Bill 221, Labour Standards Code, back to the House without amendments.
Any discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you. Bill 223, University Foundations Act. Mr. Horn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to make a motion that to return Bill 223, University Foundation Act, back to the Committee of the Whole Assembly without amendments.
Thank you, Mr. Horn. Any discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you. Bill 226, Companies Act. Ms. Diab.
I'm pleased to make a motion to move the amendments to the Companies Act back to the House without any amendments.
Any discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you. Bill 228, the Housing Nova Scotia Act. Mr. Horn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to make a motion to return Bill 228, the Housing Nova Scotia Act, back to the Committee of the Whole Assembly without amendments.
Any discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you. Bill 230, the Municipal Government Act and the Halifax Regional Municipal Charter. Ms. Diab.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm pleased to move the Municipal Government Act and Halifax Regional Municipality Charter amendments back to the House without any amendments.
Any discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you. That concludes our work for today. I'd like to thank the presenters that came in to the legislature today to present, and also to all of the civil servants that attended here today. I know that there was a lot of work in the background behind these pieces of legislation, so thanks for helping to shepherd it through law amendments. So with that, I will declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you very much.